Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. We're going to be tackling learning and memory today.
Oh,
Well, all thanks to this chapter you sent us, and
yeah.
we're ready to break it all down for you and
Yeah.
explore some pretty amazing research
I think,
and hopefully uncover some useful stuff you can actually use.
yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? It's incredible to think about how these intricate processes shape who we are as humans,
Mhm.
and how we navigate the world around us. Like understanding how our brains learn and remember is really, I think, key to unlocking our full potential.
Totally. And we're not just skimming the surface here. We're going deep,
Yeah.
covering everything from how evolution has kind of wired us for learning to the cellular mechanics that actually make memory stick. You'll learn about sea slugs that hold secrets to memory. The brain is a complex computer, and even that mysterious memory trace.
Yeah, let's set the stage first. I think you might not realize this, but learning and memory are fundamentally about adapting to the environment. You know, even the simplest organisms, like without complex brains like ours, demonstrate these basic feedback mechanisms that help them survive.
So even a single-celled organism, like moving towards a food source, is exhibiting a form of adaptive behavior, even if it's not conscious learning as we typically think about it.
Exactly. And as organisms evolved, so did their nervous systems. Multicellular organisms needed a way for their cells to talk quickly, communicate rapidly, and coordinate actions.
Hmm.
And that's where neural networks came in. They provide this super fast communication system for sophisticated responses to the environment.
Okay, so that's the foundation. But what about us humans? With our big, complex brains, what kinds of learning are we even capable of?
Well, we're constantly learning in many different ways. Some are more obvious than others. Our brains are wired for adaptation from the get-go. As we develop, our brains are taking in information and fine-tuning those neural connections all the time.
And then there's that whole short-term versus long-term memory thing we all experience. I can remember a phone number long enough to dial it, but then it's gone. But remembering my childhood home or how to ride a bike, those memories stick with me.
You've hit on a crucial distinction, and here's where it gets really interesting. The hippocampus, a structure deep in the brain, plays a starring role in turning those fleeting short-term memories into lasting long-term memories.
So the hippocampus is kind of like the memory gatekeeper, deciding what gets filed away for the long haul.
That's a great way to think about it, but it begs the question, how do memories actually form? What's happening at the cellular level?
Yeah, I'm all ears. It's amazing to think that something as complex as a memory comes down to tiny changes in our brains.
It really is remarkable. The magic happens at synapses, those tiny gaps between neurons where signals are transmitted. Essentially, learning involves strengthening or weakening these connections, like turning the volume up or down on incoming information.
Okay, so is that what's happening when I get used to the feeling of my clothes on my skin and stop noticing it? Is that an example of those connections weakening?
You got it. That's adaptation in action. A decrease in neural response to a constant or repeated stimulus. It's how our brains filter out the noise so we can focus on what matters.
And then there's the opposite. Like when I suddenly notice a mosquito bite that I didn't feel before, is that those connections getting stronger?
Exactly. That's facilitation, an increase in neural response to a new or important stimulus. It's how we zero in on changes that could be crucial for survival.
Wow, it's amazing how our brains are constantly making these adjustments without us even realizing it.
Yeah.
But how did scientists figure all of this out?
Well, you might be surprised to learn that we owe a lot of our understanding of these fundamental processes to a rather unassuming creature, the sea slug.
Sea slugs, seriously. What could they possibly teach us about the complexities of the human brain?
It might sound strange, but sea slugs, specifically a type called aplysia, have been instrumental in unlocking some of the secrets of learning and memory. Their neurons are relatively large and easy to study, making them ideal for observing synaptic changes.
So by studying these simple creatures, scientists were able to gain insights into the basic mechanisms of learning that apply to more complex brains like ours.
Precisely. Researchers like Eric Kandel, a Nobel laureate, made groundbreaking discoveries using aplysia. They found that learning involves changes in the strength of synaptic connections. And these changes are driven by the activity of neurons. It's a fundamental principle that holds true across species.
So our brains are constantly rewiring themselves based on what we learn and experience. Just like those sea slugs, it's mind-blowing to think about.
It is. And it brings us to another fascinating concept, the brain as a computational machine. I know it sounds strange to think of our brains as computers, but there are striking parallels in how they process information.
Okay, so we're not talking about silicon chips and circuits here. But how exactly does the brain resemble a computer?
Think of it this way. Just like a computer uses logic gates to process information, Our brains rely on neurons to perform computations. Each neuron receives input from other neurons, processes this information, and sends an output to other
So
neurons.
it's like a vast network of interconnected processors constantly exchanging signals and making calculations.
Exactly. And one of the key breakthroughs in understanding this neural computation came from the work of Warren McCulloch and Walter Pitts back in the 1940s. They developed a model of the neuron known as the McCulloch-Pitts neuron that helped scientists understand how networks of neurons can perform complex computations.
So their model treated the neuron as a simple logic gate, like an AND gate or an OR gate in a computer.
That's the idea. They propose that neurons receive inputs, add them up, and if the sum exceeds a certain threshold, they fire an output signal. This simple yet powerful concept revolutionized our understanding of information processing in the brain.
It's incredible to think that our brains use neurons and chemical signals instead of wires and electricity to do these computations. But how does all of this lead to the formation of memories? What's the special ingredient that makes memories stick?
The secret ingredient is synaptic plasticity, the ability of synapses to change their strength. And one of the key players in this process is a special receptor called the NMDA receptor.
The NMDA receptor. I've heard that term before.
Yeah.
But could use a refresher on exactly what it does.
Think of the NMDA receptor as a tiny switch on certain neurons that strengthens connections between them when they fire together. It's like a key player in long-term potentiation, the process that makes synaptic connections stronger and memories last longer.
So this receptor is crucial for making those memories stick.
Absolutely. And here's what's fascinating about the NMDA receptor. It has this unique coincidence detection ability. It needs two things to happen at the same time to activate glutamate binding to the receptor A and ND of the neuron being depolarized, meaning its electrical charge becomes more positive.
Okay, so it's like a double lock, needing two keys to turn before it opens and strengthens that connection.
That's a great analogy. This coincidence detection ensures that only the connections between neurons that are actively firing together are strengthened, making it essential for learning and memory formation.
So the more those neurons fire together, the stronger their bond becomes. All thanks to that NMDA receptor. This is getting really complex, but it's also incredibly exciting to learn about these microscopic processes that shape our memories and who we are.
It is. And it sets the stage for understanding how those short-term memories transition into long-term memories, which is where another fascinating process comes into play, long-term potentiation, or LTP.
Let's hear it. How does LTP fit into all of this?
LTP is that long-lasting increase in synaptic strength we've been talking about. Imagine a path in the woods. The more you walk it, the more defined and easier it becomes to follow. That's LTP in action.
So LTP is essentially the process of making those neural pathways more robust and permanent, carving those paths deeper and deeper in our brains.
Exactly. And we have solid scientific evidence to back this up. Researchers have stimulated neurons in the hippocampus and observed these changes in synaptic strength firsthand. They've shown that repeated stimulation leads to stronger connections that can last for hours, days, or even longer.
Wow. So every time we learn something new, we're actually strengthening the connections between neurons in our brains. And it sounds like the hippocampus is playing a starring role in all of this.
It certainly is. The hippocampus is like a central hub, receiving information from all over the brain and binding it together to form a cohesive memory. It's like a grand central station for memories.
So if the hippocampus is so vital for memory, what happens when it's damaged? I'm a little afraid to ask, but I have to know.
That's a great question, and it leads us to one of the most fascinating and poignant case studies in neuroscience, the story of patient HM.
Oh, I've heard of HM.
Yeah.
Wasn't he the man who couldn't form new memories after brain surgery?
That's right. HM suffered from severe epilepsy. To alleviate his seizures, surgeons removed a portion of his brain, including his hippocampus. The surgery was successful in reducing his seizures, but came with a devastating side effect. HM lost the ability to form new memories. He could remember his past, but anything new was quickly forgotten.
That must have been a heartbreaking experience for him, to be essentially trapped in the present moment.
It was HM's case revolutionized our understanding of the hippocampus and its crucial role in consolidating short-term memories into long-term storage.
So the hippocampus is like the bridge between our present experiences and our lasting memories. And without it, those experiences just fade away.
You've captured it perfectly.
Yeah.
And HM's story emphasizes just how vital the hippocampus is for our ability to learn and adapt throughout our lives.
It really makes you appreciate how a single structure in the brain can have such a profound impact on who we are and how we experience the world. But if long-term memories aren't stored in the hippocampus, where do they go?
That's where the cortex comes in. The outermost layer of the brain, responsible for all those higher-level cognitive functions we humans pride ourselves on.
So the hippocampus is like a temporary storage unit, and then the cortex is where those memories are filed away for good.
That's a great way to visualize it. Think of the hippocampus as a librarian who helps you find the right book, memory, in a vast library cortex. It guides the transfer of memories to the cortex, where they become woven into our existing knowledge networks.
So those memories actually become part of who we are, shaping our thoughts, feelings, and actions.
Precisely. And recent research has shed light on how this transfer might work. Scientists have discovered specialized neurons in the hippocampus called place cells and grid cells. These cells create a mental map of our surroundings, helping us navigate and remember locations.
So it's like our brains have a built-in GPS, providing a spatial context for our memories. No wonder I can vividly remember the layout of my childhood home.
That's a perfect example. These cells provide the scaffolding upon which our memories are built, linking our experiences to specific places and times, giving them a sense of continuity and meaning.
It's fascinating how our brains construct these intricate maps of our world and then use them to store and retrieve memories. It all seems so effortless, yet there's so much complexity going on beneath the surface.
It truly is remarkable. And this ability to connect our experiences to specific contexts is what allows us to form episodic memories, those rich, detailed recollections of past events.
So episodic memory is like our personal autobiography, a collection of stories that define who we are. It's what makes us unique individuals, shaped by our experiences and how we remember them.
Beautifully put. Episodic memory lets us relive past joys and sorrows, learn from our experiences, and weave them into the ongoing narrative of our lives. It's what gives our lives depth and meaning.
But what happens when those memories become lost or distorted? It's a bit unsettling to think about how fragile our memories can be. Like, is amnesia really like it's portrayed in the movies where someone wakes up and doesn't know who they are?
Amnesia can be a complex and challenging condition, and it's often misrepresented in popular media. There are actually different types of amnesia, each with its own set of symptoms and causes. For instance, there's anterograde amnesia, which is the inability to form new memories.
So someone with anterograde amnesia might meet someone new and then forget their name a few minutes later.
Exactly. And they might find themselves asking the same questions repeatedly or retelling the same stories, as they can't retain new information.
That must be incredibly frustrating. And what about retrograde amnesia? Is that the type where someone forgets their past?
That's right. Retrograde amnesia involves the loss of past memories, but it's often a patchy loss rather than a complete erasure. Someone with retrograde amnesia might forget specific events or periods from their life, but still retain their overall sense of self and identity.
So amnesia isn't always a complete wiping of the mental slate. It can be more like a fragmented or incomplete picture of the past.
A great way to think about it. And it's important to remember that amnesia can result from various factors, from brain injuries and strokes to infections, and even psychological trauma.
Wow, so memory loss can be a symptom of many underlying conditions. Is there a type of amnesia that's less permanent? Maybe more like a temporary glitch?
Yes. There's something called transient global amnesia, a sudden and temporary episode of memory loss that can last for a few hours. It's often caused by temporary disruptions in blood flow to the brain, and typically resolves on its own.
So it's like a sudden memory blip that eventually corrects itself. Still sounds scary, though.
It can be frightening, but it's reassuring to know it's usually not a cause for long-term concern.
This is also fascinating. But I have to admit, it's a bit unsettling to think about how vulnerable our memories can be to injury or disease.
It is. But here's the good news. Understanding the intricacies of memory can empower us to take better care of our brains and improve our learning abilities.
That's a much-needed silver lining. So what can we do to boost our brain power and make learning more effective?
There are actually several strategies based on the very principles we've been discussing. For example, we've talked about the power of spaced repetition.
Spaced repetition. That rings a bell. Isn't it about revisiting information at strategic intervals instead of cramming everything at once?
Exactly. By spacing out your study sessions, you give your brain multiple opportunities to consolidate information and strengthen those neural connections. It's like giving those neural pathways a good workout, making them more robust and resistant to forgetting.
Ah, so it's about working smarter, not harder. I like that. Any other tips and tricks we can use to maximize our learning?
Definitely. Another crucial factor is getting enough sleep.
We all know sleep is essential, but how exactly does it affect our ability to learn and remember?
Sleep is like a superpower when it comes to memory consolidation. During sleep, our brains replay and reinforce the neural activity associated with learning, helping to transfer those memories from short-term to long-term storage. It's like hitting the save button on all that new information you've taken in.
So when we're sleep deprived, we're basically depriving our brains of the time they need to process and store those memories. No wonder I feel like my brain is foggy when I don't get enough sleep.
Exactly. Sleep is crucial for making those memories stick. Another powerful technique is mental practice or visualization.
Visualization.
Hmm.
Is that like what athletes do when they imagine themselves winning a race?
Exactly. By mentally practicing a task, you're essentially activating the same neural circuits involved in actually performing that task. It's like giving your brain a sneak peek and strengthening those connections in advance.
So whether you're trying to master a musical instrument or nail a presentation, mentally rehearsing it beforehand can give your brain a head start. It's like a mental dress rehearsal.
Precisely. And don't underestimate the power of feedback in the learning process.
Feedback makes sense. We all learn from our mistakes, right?
Yeah.
It's all about course correction.
Absolutely. Both our successes and failures offer valuable feedback that helps us refine our understanding and skills. Positive feedback reinforces the neural pathways associated with the desired behavior. Meanwhile, when we make mistakes, negative feedback helps us adjust our approach and solidify the connections related to the correct response.
So our brains are constantly fine-tuning themselves. Based on the feedback we get from the world around us, we're always learning and adapting, even when we don't realize it.
That's the beauty of it. Our brains are incredibly dynamic and responsive to feedback. This incredible capacity for learning from our experiences is what allows us to thrive in an ever-changing world.
It's empowering to realize that we have more control over our learning than we might think. We're not just passively absorbing information. We can actively shape how our brains learn and remember.
Absolutely. And by understanding these principles of learning and memory, we can develop strategies to enhance our cognitive abilities and reach our full potential.
Well, this has been an incredible journey so far. I'm already feeling inspired to put some of these techniques into practice. Maybe I'll try some spaced repetition tonight, along with getting a solid 8 hours of sleep, of course.
That sounds like a great plan. Remember, learning is a lifelong adventure. The more we understand how our brains work, the better equipped we are to learn, grow, and adapt to whatever life throws our way.
This deep dive has been mind-blowing.
Okay.
And we're just getting started. We've still got so much more to explore. It's like opening one door to a whole new hallway of fascinating possibilities.
That's the beauty of science. It's a never-ending quest for knowledge and understanding. And the more we learn about the brain, the more we realize how much we still don't know.
It's both humbling and exhilarating. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I have one more question that's been swirling around in my mind.
It's a question that has intrigued philosophers and scientists for ages, you know? If our memories and experiences shape our identity, what happens to our sense of self as those memories change or fade over time?
Whoa, that's deep. Are we constantly evolving and becoming new versions of ourselves as our brains rewire and reshape those connections?
It's a fascinating paradox. We feel like we have this continuous sense of self, yet our brains are in constant flux, adapting and changing based on our experiences.
Yeah, I never thought about it that way. It really makes you question the nature of identity and how much of who we are is tied to the physical structure of our brains and the memories they hold.
It raises some profound questions about the very essence of what it means to be human, you know? While we may not have all the answers, exploring these questions is what drives scientific discovery and pushes the boundaries of our understanding.
This deep dive is already making me look at my own memories in a whole new light. But before we get too philosophical, let's bring it back down to earth. You mentioned earlier that we still have a lot to cover in this chapter. What else should we explore?
Well, we've talked about how memories are formed and stored, but let's not forget about the flip side. Forgetting. It's an essential part of how our brains manage information, even though it can be frustrating when we can't recall something we need.
Forgetting. It's the bane of my existence, especially when I'm trying to remember names or where I put my keys. But I guess you're saying there's a reason why our brains don't hold on to every single detail.
Exactly. Imagine if you remembered everything you ever saw, heard, or experienced. Your brain would be overwhelmed with information overload. Forgetting helps us filter out the noise, prioritize important information, and keep our cognitive systems running smoothly.
Okay, that makes sense. So forgetting isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's like our brains are doing some house cleaning, getting rid of the clutter we don't need anymore. But how does that process actually work? What makes certain memories fade while others stick around?
There are a few different theories about why we forget. One idea is decay theory, which suggests that memories naturally fade over time if they're not used or accessed regularly. Think about a path in the woods. If nobody walks on it for a while, it eventually becomes overgrown and less defined.
So it's like those neural connections weaken and eventually disappear if we don't revisit those memories. Use it or lose it, as they say.
Exactly. Then there's interference theory, which proposes that forgetting happens because other memories, interfere with our ability to retrieve a particular memory. This interference can be proactive, where old memories make it harder to learn new information, or retroactive, where new information interferes with our ability to recall older memories.
Ah, so that's why I sometimes mix up names or dates. Those similar memories are getting in each other's way. It's like trying to find a specific book in a messy library.
That's a great analogy. And another factor that can contribute to forgetting is retrieval failure. This occurs when we have difficulty accessing a memory, even though it's still stored in our brain.
So the memory is in there somewhere, but we just can't seem to get to it. It's like having something on the tip of your tongue, but you just can't quite spit it out.
Exactly. Retrieval cues can help us access these memories. These cues can be anything that was associated with the memory at the time it was formed: a smell, a song, a location. It's like having a keyword that unlocks the memory file in our brain.
So that familiar scent of cookies baking might trigger a childhood memory, or hearing an old song could transport you back to a specific time and place. It's amazing how powerful those sensory cues can be in unlocking memories.
It really is. And it highlights the interconnected nature of our memories and how different senses, emotions, and even contexts can be woven together in those memory traces.
Speaking of memory traces, that's a term I've encountered before but never fully grasped. What exactly is a memory trace and where is it located in the brain?
That's a question that has puzzled scientists for decades. The memory trace, also known as the enneagram, is thought to be the physical representation of a memory in the brain, but pinpointing its exact location in nature has proven to be quite elusive.
So it's like we know memories must leave some kind of physical imprint in the brain, but we haven't quite figured out the code yet.
That's the mystery. Some researchers believe that memory traces are widely distributed across various brain regions, reflecting the complex and interconnected nature of memory processing. Others believe that certain brain areas, like the hippocampus and cortex, play a more central role in storing these memory traces.
It sounds like there's still so much we don't know about the physical basis of memory. It's almost like a scientific treasure hunt, searching for those elusive memory traces in the vast landscape of the brain.
It is. And while we may not have all the answers yet, the search itself has yielded incredible insights into how our brains store and retrieve information.
Well, I'm even more intrigued by the brain now. This deep dive is full of twists and turns, and I'm eager to see what other mysteries we uncover as we go deeper into this chapter. What's next on our journey into the world of learning and memory?
We've explored the biological foundations of memory, but let's shift gears and talk about different types of memory and how they work together to shape our understanding of the world.
I'm all for expanding our memory repertoire. What kinds of memories are we talking about?
Well, we've already touched upon episodic memory, those vivid recollections of personal experiences. But there are other types of memory that play crucial roles in our daily lives, like semantic memory and procedural memory.
Fill me in. What's the difference between these types of memory?
Semantic memory is our storehouse of general knowledge about the world. Facts, concepts, language. It's what allows you to know that Paris is the capital of France, or that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius.
So it's like our mental encyclopedia, filled with all the facts and information we've accumulated over time. It's what helps us make sense of the world and understand how things work.
Exactly. And procedural memory is our memory for skills and habits, things we do automatically without conscious thought, like riding a bike, typing on a keyboard, or driving a car.
Ah, so it's the muscle memory that kicks in when we're performing actions we've done countless times before. It's what allows us to move through the world with a certain level of grace and fluency.
Precisely. And these different types of memory often work together seamlessly, influencing our thoughts, behaviors, and interactions with the world.
It's amazing how these different memory systems, each with its own unique characteristics, collaborate to create this rich tapestry of our experiences and knowledge. I'm starting to see memory as this intricate web with different strands woven together to form the fabric of who we are.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And this interconnectedness of memory systems highlights the complexity and sophistication of our brains.
This is also fascinating. I'm eager to keep exploring these different types of memory and how they influence our perceptions, actions, and understanding of the world.
Well, then let's dive deeper into these fascinating realms.
All right, so we've covered like a ton in this deep dive.
Yeah, we have.
We've explored evolution and learning and memory. We dove deep into how memories are formed and stored, and even talked about forgetting and those mysterious memory traces.
Yeah, definitely.
It's been a crazy ride. And I feel like we've just scratched the surface of this like huge and fascinating subject.
It really is.
But before we wrap things up, I have to ask, what are some practical things we can do with all this knowledge about learning and memory? Like, how can we use it to improve our lives and reach our full potential?
That's the million-dollar question, right? There's no magic bullet, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But there are evidence-based strategies we can use to optimize our learning and memory based on the principles we've been discussing, like remember spaced repetition.
Yeah.
By spacing out our study sessions and revisiting information at those strategic intervals, we can really strengthen those neural connections and improve long-term retention.
So instead of cramming all night before an exam, it's better to spread out study sessions over time, giving our brains a chance to absorb and consolidate the information.
Exactly. It's like building a solid foundation brick by brick, rather than trying to erect a tower all at once. And remember the importance of sleep?
Oh yeah, how could I forget?
Getting enough rest is absolutely crucial for memory consolidation, allowing our brains to replay and reinforce those neural pathways while we're sleeping.
So those late-night study sessions might actually be backfiring,
Right.
robbing our brains of the sleep they need to process and store those memories.
Exactly. Adequate sleep is essential for optimal cognitive function, including learning and memory. And let's not forget the power of active recall.
All right.
Instead of passively rereading notes or textbooks, challenge yourself to actually retrieve information from memory. Quiz yourself, explain concepts to others, or engage in active problem solving.
So it's not just about stuffing information into our brains, but also about practicing retrieving it. It's like giving our memory muscles a good workout.
That's a fantastic analogy. Active recall forces our brains to work harder, strengthening those neural connections and making memories more accessible. And don't underestimate the power of making connections and finding meaning in what you're learning.
So instead of just memorizing isolated facts, it's better to relate new information to things we already know, or to real-world applications.
Exactly. When we can connect new knowledge to our existing understanding or see its relevance to our lives, it becomes more meaningful and easier to remember. Our brains are wired to seek patterns and connections, so help them out by making those links explicit.
This is so cool. It's like we have this toolbox of strategies we can use to enhance our learning and memory, all based on the science of how our brains work.
That's the amazing thing about understanding these principles. By applying this knowledge, we can become more active and engaged learners, unlock our cognitive potential, and approach learning with a sense of curiosity and excitement.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling inspired to put all of this into practice. I'm going to revamp my study habits, prioritize sleep, and embrace those active recall techniques.
That's fantastic. Remember, learning is a lifelong journey. The more we understand how our brains work, the more effectively we can navigate the ever-evolving landscape of knowledge and experience.
This deep dive has been absolutely mind-blowing, and I want to thank you for sharing your expertise and insights with us.
It's been my pleasure. I'm always excited to delve into these fascinating realms and explore the mysteries of the human brain.
And a huge thank you to you, our listener, for joining us on this journey of discovery. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and practical tips to enhance your own learning and memory. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.